This is such an exciting time of the year. It's not quite spring, but it's really warming up. And if you have an undercover growing space like a polytunnel or a greenhouse, you can really start coming out during the day and just basking in the warmth. Now at night, it does dip down to quite low temperatures, at least in my garden. But despite that, the crops that I have planted in here and have overwintered are starting to come back to life. So the lettuce and the rocket and the mustard that I planted out here last autumn, they're putting on new growth, and we're getting the extra early harvest that I had planned. In the flowerbed, I've got containers that I've overwintered in here, and I've put them in here to protect the pots, but also to encourage them to grow a little bit earlier. And so you can see that there are mint leaves coming up, the geraniums are coming back to life. There are even plants that normally would die over winter, like Cape gooseberry here, that have survived. And so that's a bonus. Out in the garden, it's a different story. In a month's time, 6 weeks time, it will catch up with things that are in here. But for now, a lot of plants are still dormant and sleeping. But that gives us a chance to prepare for spring. And so what I've been doing outside is a lot of mulching, a lot of weeding, and also sowing some seeds that do benefit from a little bit of extra cold weather before spring. In the house, on heat and under grow lights are some of the very first seedlings of the year. And these are all different types of vegetables that need a long growing period and also protection from cold weather. So we have tomatoes here, there are some peppers here, so sweet peppers, and I've also got celeriac here. So celeriac is a winter root vegetable, very hardy, but if you don't get it started soon enough in the year, then you won't tend to get a very good harvest. Also here are these little baggies, and I'd like to explain what exactly is happening here. There are a number of reasons why we don't see any sprouts after we sow our seeds. Outdoors in the garden, if you sow seeds, it could be that slugs take out the tiny seedlings, and this happens a lot, which is why I start most of my seeds undercover, especially in the beginning part of the year, because I can keep an eye on them and I can nurture them and protect them from slugs and from bad weather and all of that. The other main reason is that seeds are old or not viable for some reason. Maybe they were stored someplace that wasn't optimal. Maybe they're just out of date. And so when you have seeds that are not their best, what you can have is very sporadic germination. So the seeds don't actually germinate, and it's not necessarily your fault. But what we can do, instead of throwing out the seeds, is to pre-sprout them. And this works a treat, and that's what these baggies are. I had some issue with my eggplant, my aubergines germinating, as well as some peppers. I do have a couple in here, but not anywhere near the amount of seeds that I multi-sowed into these little pots. And so what I have done is I've taken the seeds and I've put them on wet kitchen roll or paper towels, put them into little baggies, and they're here where it's warm, where there's light. They've got moisture inside the bag because I sprayed that paper. And what I'm doing is I'm watching to see when they germinate and if they germinate. And it's only been 2 days since I put these here, and I can already start to see the very first roots off of the eggplant here. So what that tells me is that those seeds are germinating, at least some of them, and I can go in then very, very gently, take those seeds out, and then plant them up into their own individual little pots. Potting up these sprouted seeds is pretty easy. What I have here is a set of modules, and I've just filled them with multi-purpose potting mix. I also have some more here in a sieve. It's mixed with vermiculite just to create a finer texture. And I've got a little skewer, and around here somewhere I've also got some tweezers. What I'm gonna do with the skewer is just make a little hole at the center of each one of these modules. because as we take these sprouted seeds out, we don't want to damage the roots at all. So we just want to plop them down into a little hole and then leave them relatively undisturbed to continue growing. I've taken the paper out of the plastic bag, and if you look closely, you can still see some seeds in there. We'll go in and fetch them should we have enough space. But now what I'm going to do is either use my fingers, or better yet, use some tweezers and just grab the seed end of these. So I've got one right there. Just put down the paper and then very gently pop it down into one of the holes. And the skewer comes in handy here. And I also do this by just putting them directly out in the soil in the garden. And that works for hardier veg like parsnips. So with this, I'm leaving the seed exposed because the leaves are in there. You can almost see them growing inside, just all curled up. And I'm just gonna leave that for now and fill up the rest of these cells. I've finished up, and I also made the decision to use all of the spares to create a second planting in each of the cells. So there's pretty much 2 for each one of these cells. And so that's just insurance in case the first one doesn't take. And I should also clarify that the little white squiggly bit coming out of the seed initially is the root. And then the leaves are curled up still in that seed capsule, and it will eventually come off as the leaves push it off. You can see that kind of happening with that one. Some of these seeds are much further along than the other ones. Now, instead of planting them, so as far as firming the soil around them, what I'm going to do instead to avoid any kind of pressure or damage to the roots is to just sift some potting mix over the top. And you can see it's just quite gentle, and the sieve keeps any of the big bits in here. So we've got a nice tray of sprouted eggplant, aubergine seedlings here. I'm going to water this, and then I'm going to take it back into the house and put it under the grow lights. In early spring, the dining room becomes a seedling room, and I've done some rearranging in here since I brought the aubergine seedlings back in. So let's have a look at them and what else is over here. The aubergines, so the eggplant, are right down here, and there's grow lights right above. There's no bottom heat because they've already germinated, and with luck we'll see some green leaves popping out of the potting mix there very soon. Next to them, these are big beefsteak tomato varieties. So I started these early. So there are 2 types, including the ananas noir that I've grown before. And next to them, we've got different types of kale and broccoli and Brussels sprouts. I've just sown some other tomato varieties. So these are cherry types like honeycomb. This is my favorite cherry tomato. Next to my second favorite, which is Gardener's Delight. Gardener's Delight is an open pollinated type. So I have saved seeds, and I used my own saved seed to sow these, as well as black crim. Those little sprouted eggplant seeds are planted up now, and with luck and care, they'll turn into healthy seedlings that I can plant out in the Polycrub in May. But confession time. The peppers and the eggplant weren't the only seeds that I had germination issues with thus far this year. Do you recall sowing onion seeds together in January? Well, they've not done much. And it could be my fault, it could have been the potting mix, but it's now getting a bit too late to be sowing seeds for bulb onions, at least in my climate. And so I'm now going with plan B for my onions, and that is growing them from sets. I have some already growing in the greenhouse, which are the Japanese onion sets, the Senshyu, and I've grown those before. They're a great sweet onion. But I've also stopped by the garden center, and I have shallots and some red onions, and so these are going to go out in the garden right now. So let's go plant them. At the top of the garden is the wildflower bank, which you of course will have seen from years previous. And it has been an explosion of beautiful wildflowers that attract pollinators, that look great, and that kind of fill a weird space in the garden, because there's not as much that I can think to grow here on the slope, and why not grow something that's beautiful and low maintenance? However, what I have found is that annual seed mixes of wildflowers are high maintenance rather than low maintenance, because you sow them the first year, you get a really good explosion of color, and then the next year very little remains, and then it gives opportunity for weed seeds to germinate and to take over. And that's what happened with 2 parts of this wildflower bank last year. I had sown an RHS seed mix on either side of the perennial mix, which we'll get to in a second, and it looked great. And then last year I let it just carry on growing, and there were lots of wild plants in it. It looked good, it looked all right, but dock started settling in, nettles, creeping buttercup, what else? Bindweed, buddleia, which is a flower but also very weedy. And so if I didn't do anything about it, it would have actually just taken over and been a complete mess. So over the winter, a friend and I have weeded those areas 4 times. 3 times together. One time I did it on my own right before re-sowing both of the side patches with a new batch of perennial wildflower seeds. And that's what's growing in the center, and that's been a real big success. I sowed it originally in early 2022, and over the past few years it has just carried on blooming, keeping weeds down, and creating a really low maintenance space. And so I wanted to make sure that I got as many of the weeds out of there as possible, and then I covered the bare soil with sterile compost. I bought it in because the compost that I make isn't necessarily sterile. You get all kinds of things popping up, tomatoes, for example. And so I covered it in that potting mix or that compost, and then I sowed the seed, which I had in my refrigerator since January, that I got from a local charity. It is still a trial mix, so it's not available to the public, but that's something that I hope will carry on blooming and being absolutely beautiful. And at some point in the future, hopefully, at least people here in the Isle of Man can get access to that perennial wildflower seed mix. Oh, hey, Maggie. You're going to be seeing a lot more flowers in the garden this year. There have always been quite a few, but this year I'm focusing on bringing a lot of color and also usefulness. In this brand new bed here at the side of the garden are 3 damask roses. I bought them bare root, which are easier to buy, cheaper to buy, especially this time of the year. They arrive in winter in the dormant period without any soil around their roots, and then you can plant them and away they go. These are Portland damask roses, so they're going to be blooming hopefully continuously through the summer, and they're varieties that I can use to make rose essential oil, rose hydrosol, and that will look really beautiful. I planted these bare root roses no dig style. Now, obviously, I had to dig holes for the plants. No dig does not mean that you don't ever dig. It just means that you don't turn over the soil unnecessarily. And it is also an easy method for creating flower beds, vegetable beds, any kind of growing space. What I did is I just edged this area with a lawn edger just to create a defining border. And then I pulled grass or any obvious perennial weeds out of the area, dug in the 3 bare root roses, and then I covered the entire bed with landscaping fabric. Mine is made out of cornstarch. It's biodegradable after some years, but you could use traditional landscaping fabric or cardboard. And then I've covered the entire area with more of that sterile compost that I've used on the wildflower bank. And that's going to add nutrients to the soil. It's going to leach through the landscaping fabric, but it's also going to hold that fabric down. And that fabric is really important, or cardboard, because it will stifle growth of any of the plants that are still in the soil there and stops the weed seeds from germinating. The landscaping fabric, I can take it off of this bed in 6 months to a year's time, and the bed will be turned over by worms. It will be a really nice tilth. And if I wanted to also plant any more flowers in this bed in the meantime, I can just make a little cut through the fabric and plant right through. We're just a couple of weeks, or less than a couple of weeks, till spring is officially here, but things are starting to heat up in the garden. It's not particularly warm, but there's a lot of seed sowing. There's a lot of prep work, so I'm going to be carrying on with mulching all of these beds, weeding, and setting the framework for a good gardening year ahead. So there's going to be tons of crops, there's going to be tons of flowers, tons of skincare plants, and I'm going to be showing you more about how to use and prepare and harvest, and just so much excitement for the gardening year ahead. Let me know as a comment down below where you are at with your spring prep, whether there's still snow on the ground, if you've got any questions about anything that you've seen in this video, if you've been having germination problems as well. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and this is the garden in March. Can't wait to get into spring. Bye for now.